In this video, let's talk about model validation. We have learned about model binding, which is the process to extract data from the HTTP request object into our .NET objects in our endpoint handler so that we can have the data to work with. So now that we have everything, are we ready to actually implement the business logic? No, we don't, because we need to validate the data. More than often, the data comes from the HTTP request. It's actually from the end user. So therefore, model validation here is very important, and model validation is the process of validating data within the endpoint handler parameter. So let me draw some picture again, grab some diagram here. So in this diagram, we have this. Let me copy this and paste it over here. So we have the routing and we have the model binding that happens before the endpoint is executed. Now that we have the model binding already, when the endpoint is executed, our function over here is bigger. All right. So when we execute so here we're executing the endpoint. We're executing a endpoint function. All right, let's imagine that our endpoint is just fx and the x is the .NET object. So because we have model binding so that we can extract data and put that into the x object. Now that we have the x object and this object contains the data that comes from the user, right, through the HTTP request, we can use this data. But before we use the data, we need to validate the data. Why? The data actually comes from the user. And when the user provides the data, first of all, the user might be a hacker, right? So some malicious attempt may be made here in order to break the system. Therefore, you need to validate it. Secondly, if it's just a regular user, the user might provide any information, any unimaginable information. So do not always assume that the user will choose to do the right thing. We as a developer need to make sure that we cover all possibilities. Therefore, we need a model validation. This, if we call this as a model object, then the model validation, of course, means that we need to validate the model. So how do we validate a model? We can use a C# technology. So this is not part of ASP.NET Core. It's just C#. It's something that is called data annotation. Let's actually create a new project. Open up Visual Studio over here, and this time we can create a new project or new solution from the file menu. Let's go over here, go to new, and then click on project. And same thing, we choose this ASP.NET Core empty and click on next. And this solution, I'm going to say learn model validation. Again, this project, I'm going to call it web app framework.NET 9. And check this, click on create and close this. Now let's go to program.cs. Right, so let's have some model first of all. Let me grab source code and paste it over here. All right, so we have employee class defined here, and we have employee repository defined here. Feel free to extract this to separate class. But in this lesson, let's just use the class right inside the program.cs file. Right, this is not a good way to implement any production-ready project. This is just for demonstration purpose. You actually need to extract this into a different folder at least. And most likely, in your production-ready project, you will have a separate class library C# class that contains this. Okay, so data annotation, which means that we're specifying how to validate the data right on the class itself. For example, we're saying that when you provide a new employee or update an employee, the name property is required. So the user has to specify the name property. We can use required, and automatically the namespace is imported, which is from the system.component model.data annotation. So this is not part of ASP.NET Core. This is just C#. All right, so name is required. And let's say a salary is also required, but salary has to be higher than 50,000. So we can use something else. It's called range. Inside range, we can specify the minimum value here. We can say 50,000. And maximum value, we can also provide, let's say maximum value is 200,000. All right, so this specifies the salary range. And with this too, then when we try to implement the post method, for example, let's try to implement the post method very quickly. Map post and post into the employees root template. And then we specify the employee model binding. So this is going to come from the body. This goes to a lambda expression like this. And then we're going to use employee repository here, add employee. We can do some validation, of course, over here inside the lambda expression. That's the most primitive type of validation. Developers can just directly validate the data. But with the help of ASP.NET Core Framework, we can actually take advantage of the C# feature, which is data annotation. We specify how these things can be validated, and our logic inside our actual lambda expression, actual endpoint handling logic here, it's very simple. We don't have to do anything special. And here we can return the message. We can say employee is added successfully, and that's it. Before we can do anything about this, we have to enable data annotation validation. With minimal API, it's not actually part of the minimal API framework. It's not part of the technology itself. With MVC and Razor Pages, later you will see that the model validation is automatically triggered when you provide data annotations to your models. Here in minimal API, you have to add a NuGet package. I think last time when I pay attention to this, Microsoft says that they are actually working on this. In the meantime, you need to add some third-party NuGet package. So let's try to right-click on this and then go to Manage NuGet package. And then over here, so search minimal APIs. And the first one is minimal APIs.extension. It has 266K. A lot of installation. Just try to install the latest stable version. Install. Click on I accept. And it is, I believe it's already installed. Now, get back over here and go to the endpoint that you're trying to create, right? This endpoint handler here. So this time, we're actually using the top level endpoint creation. Remember previously, we had to say app.use endpoints. So this is the way that we taught in the previous section. But when we thought about this, we were saying that, okay, you can use this way or you can use this way, but it's easier to use the endpoints so that we are pretty clear what we are doing, right? So when we do it this way, we say endpoints, and then we're creating different endpoints just like this. And when we do it this way, we have to specifically use the routing middleware, right? So we can do it this way, but then if we use endpoints like this, we have to say app.use routing. But when we are using top level endpoints creation, we don't have to specify user routing. I personally don't like this. I want to be specific or explicit, but since we're here and we're taking advantage of this, we can omit those because the use routing, the routing middleware is by default added if we're using the top level endpoint creation way. So when we do this, the routing middleware is automatically added before this. Okay, So we installed the minimal API extension NuGet package. In order to validate it, we have to say with parameters validation, just like this. It's very simple. Just add this method at the end of this map post method, and then let's save it and run it. The home page is not found. That's because we don't have a root template that corresponds to the root URL. So now, before we do anything, let's go back and see our validation. Okay, so we have name is required and we have salary. Right, position is not required at this moment. So let's say that we are going to add Tom Anderson, but without the position. And the salary is slightly lower. Then what's going to happen? Let's see. Okay. Well, we can't do it because the port number is wrong. So let's bring up our web browser and copy and paste this over here. Okay, let's try again. Click on send button. Now we see 400 baht requests and the salary. It says this field must be between 50,000 and 200,000. See, this range attribute here actually works very well. So let's change this to 50,000. And now if I click on send, employee is added successfully. So it works, right? You can also try to add the position back. Okay, position, and change to developer with double quotes for sure. And now if you don't provide a name, add the comma over here, you're gonna get a similar problem here. The name field is required. Okay, let's add the name field back, and everything would be correct this time if we provide a different name. Let's say Tom Jerry Anderson, ID number 5, and click on send again. Before we do that, let's add a comma. So this is a valid JSON, and let's try to post that, and we get employee added successfully message again. All right, so this is how you work with data annotations in minimal API. And when we talk about MVC and Razor Pages, you will see that it's very, very similar. It just has a few more features. Right? Minimal API is minimal, but it's really good to understand how ASP.NET Core works. That's why I'm teaching minimal API at the very beginning. So in this video, we covered how to use annotations to annotate, and we only covered required and range. There are so many different features you can use. So let's go into the browser and let's search C# data annotations. And then let's click on this validation with data annotation validator, and let's look at this. There's just so much information. This is an example. I believe there is another article regarding this. Maybe let's go to the namespace itself. All right, so if we come to the system.component model.data annotation namespace over here, you can see that we have so many different attributes. We have compare attribute, which is used to compare two different properties. Credit card, this is to specify the data has to be credit card number, right? Concurrency check, data type attribute, display attribute. Display attribute is to provide a different name for the property. And let's say length attribute. This is to specify minimum or maximum length of a string. Maximum length attribute, phone attribute, range attribute, we use this, and we have regular expression as well. We use required attribute over here, and time space stamp, right? String length. And we are going to talk about validation attribute later in the next video. But if you want to play with these validation attributes, come to this learn.microsoft.com article and explore yourself. All right, that's everything I want to talk about in this video. Any questions, please let me know. If not,